Oh, happy day. This is episode 6 of Making Change. I'm Lisa Mazzanetto, licensed clinical mental health counselor, licensed clinical addiction specialist. So excited about our podcast today.
It is really exciting. It seems like it's been a very long time. I'm Kathy Godfrey and not licensed and certified in anything. I just have had a really interesting personal journey that I really enjoy sharing with other people. As I found out, who knew, that we actually can live a life that feels the way we want it to feel. I think we've all suspected that all along. We've talked about that many times, that everybody I've ever worked with has said, since I was a child, I just thought there has to be more to this whole living thing than this. There must surely be something more. So that's how this whole journey started for me. And in the past 7, 8 years, I've been sharing that with other people. So yeah, here we are.
I'm so grateful you have. So, we have a very special guest today. I'm so excited about having a guest on our
Yay.
podcast. And we have Rebecca joining us today to participate in how this works, like how this magic that Kathy, and I know Kathy, you wouldn't call it magic, but I will call it magic, how this magic works. And Rebecca has been willing to join us today to participate in that. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited. Also, I would use that word magic. It's just with a distinction, that is that everybody has it. It's not magic that I do. It's just that we all have it, and it's easy enough to discover that if that's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll say just a little bit about why we invited Rebecca to join us, because I was thinking back over the previous episodes and feeling like something was missing. It didn't feel as dynamic or powerful as my private sessions with folks often feel. And so Lisa and I discussed how could we communicate like what this process really is to listeners, and so we invited Rebecca to experience it real time. And we don't know what that it is. As you guys who know me know, there's no plan. I have no agenda. I don't have a clipboard here with me. I don't have anything. And so Rebecca's questions will be what determines where we go and how that turns out for her. But I'm excited for all of you listening to be able to hear what happens in this process instead of just hearing me talk about it. I think a listener that works with me privately said, she said, sometimes in the the podcast, it sounds like we're studying you, like you're some kind of like a specimen for listeners to be studying. And she was describing that, a feeling of a little bit of distance, even though she does the work with me. And so, yeah, very excited to be able to do this real time.
Me too.
Cool. I'm excited to participate.
Okay, so we'll just let's just jump right in. So as much as possible, this is a little bit of an unusual situation, obviously, because there are three of us and because we're recording, but as much as possible, I'm just going to treat you, Rebecca, as if you are any first time session that I have with folks. And so from this moment forward, we'll just proceed in that way. And Lisa, feel free to interject or add questions or whatever, in whatever way you want to participate.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Rebecca, I don't know if we touched base via phone for a few minutes the other day, just so you'd know what to expect, but we didn't talk about what necessarily we would talk about today. And so I just want to invite you to talk a little bit about why you are interested in our invitation. Like, why were you curious about this at all?
Yeah, so over the past year or so, I've been way more dedicated than I ever have been to finally wanting to solve all of the pain that I've been experiencing, the grief that I've experienced throughout my life. I moved to Asheville 4 years ago and removed myself from the center of all of the trauma that I experienced as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, and felt like I did all of the work that I could do on my own and decided I need some professional help consistently, to start really looking at these things, getting feedback, being held accountable, being called out when I, wasn't necessarily seeing things through the clearest lens possible. And that has helped immensely. And I continue to dig deeper into books around self-help books, philosophy, all of the different things that could change the way I look at the world and the way I can understand and connect the dots from my experiences, even from, being in the womb to like the whole epigenetics thing to like past life. I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor and how that could affect me. And so this was an interesting invitation to me because it's just one more way I can hopefully really start to, be on a path where it's not, all of that's not affecting me the way it has been and impeding my ability to enjoy my life fully and find peace.
I really love that so much. It's absolutely not necessary for me to have a similar path to a client, but all of what you just described sounds very like my path as well. Like with all the studying and the questioning and the doing, I was willing to do anything as well. Like whatever crossed my path that would help me with the way I described myself as being the most miserable person on the planet. I was a bit dramatic back in those days as well, but I really did believe that. I think I did. So I love hearing all of that. So let's just start then. And my first question to you is, do you have something in mind that you feel like when you think about it or when you encounter it, creates some feelings that you don't like?
Yeah, so leading up to today, I was trying not to think about it so much because I feel like there are throughout my days a lot of things that I've judged myself for and would like to improve about myself so that I don't feel like hampered by my thoughts. And then last night I was always falling asleep, and once in the middle of the night, like I had this repeating feeling of this is probably what I'm going to wake up wanting to talk about, is that I feel no matter what I do, and I do a lot of pretty interesting things with my life, and a lot of challenging things with my life, that nothing I ever do within those things is quite good enough, not impressive enough, not enough to share with the world or to improve the world in any way. And so I kind of spin my wheels around, I'm honing in on all of these skills, many skills of a huge variety, and never feel like it's good enough. Definitely having that imposter syndrome and just feeling like a fraud about it.
Yes, yeah, that's a really common description of how it feels to be. So I'm going to review a little bit, Rebecca. I know that you've listened to the podcast, so some of this will be a review for you, but just in case there's someone listening who hasn't heard kind of my basic approach. But what you just described is so common for people whose felt experiences are being controlled by a self-definition that they don't see. And that's what makes it feel so frustrating, is that intellectually you have all the information and you're willing to take in more. Like you are actively seeking, and yet you continue to experience no matter what you do, even if it's, say, fulfill a big dream, as I had that experience too. Like if I finally accomplish this thing that I've always wanted to do, surely I will feel different about me, but I never did. Not in all the things that I tried, not in relationships or academia or accumulating things, finally moving into the middle class world. Like none of that did anything. So my little review reminder here for you and for everybody is that we learned who we are, we think, who we believe we are, at the same time that we learned language. And as we were learning that language, we were learning it from people who had the exact same thing that we're talking about, a self-definition that they too had learned from somebody at the time that they were learning language. Now, the thing that feels tricky and frustrating about this is because we learn it when we learn language, it seems like not like something separate from us. It seems like it's us, because you can't remember ever not having it. And so that feels very much like, well, it must be part of me if I can't remember not feeling this way or not thinking this way. But really, that's the first mystery that we can solve intellectually, is that it feels like it's you because your left hemisphere was being programmed with concepts as you were learning language, and they weren't, you didn't have any to think about the concepts that you were learning. So we could say that there was a point at which you had a thought for the first time about not being good enough, and you wouldn't have noticed that. It would have been a feeling, but you didn't have the language. I guess it's like, it's your left hemisphere doesn't come preloaded with the ability to think about the context of, or think within a context about the definitions that you're learning. So it seems like, for example, if I ask you to tell me, when did you learn the definition of apple, say, can you remember the exact moment that you learned what an apple is?
No, not really.
Right. And it's this, it's the same with anything. So if I asked you, do you remember the very moment that you concluded that you weren't good enough? Same thing,
Yeah, I
right?
couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason that it feels like it's who we are. And we just think, I remember thinking this to myself, like in my teens and 20s especially. I just remember thinking, how am I going to be able to navigate the world if this is who I am? Feeling constantly like I didn't know what it was, but it seemed like other people had something, an ability, some instructions, a way of understanding something about life that I didn't have. And how was I going to be able to compensate for that? Of course, before that, I wasn't thinking that out, but I definitely was living that in efforts to perform and get attention, and feelings of anxiety and depression and all of those things that you probably have experienced as well. So I'm going to take a breath and just hear anything that you want to say as you think about, okay, if it's logically that this is just a concept and not who I actually am, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I actually think about that a lot because I've read all the books and I've talked to the people that have done this before me, and it's kind of maddening to look at it and say, I understand that this is false. I know that this, like, what I have been told isn't my reality. I get to choose my reality, but still feel, not horrible all the time, but many times just feel horrible about myself and not be able to change it. Even though I can say, this is not true, I still feel this way.
Right.
Sucks.
It does. I think it sucks more than having no clue, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're no longer, free with ignorance.
Right. Right. It's even worse to know it and to feel like you can't do anything about it is even worse. So the intellect, that what you just described, is really only the first step to freeing yourself, and it's typically where people stop, because it feels like there's nowhere else to go, and yet I still feel this way, so I'm going to somehow make the best of this. But what I laugh about often, and we often end this podcast with, is there's actually no reason to settle for less than joy all the time. That's another thing that we learned, is that, oh, well, suffering is just part of being human, and you're not going to be happy all the time. I hear that so often. People say, well, I know I'm not going to be happy all the time. And my question always is, how do you know that? How do you know that's not a thing, not a possibility? So the next step then to freeing yourself is you have to actually look for evidence that it's not true. And with an open mind, like I often say, okay, maybe you do suck. I say that. I will say to you, maybe you do. Maybe you're the one person who like really is not good enough. Like you're like, you really are. That's really true about you. And that sounds funny, but it's very freeing to just say, I'm willing for that to be the case. And I did that definitely in my own journey. I said, I don't know what I'm going to find out, but I definitely have to ask some different questions. And that was one of them. Like, if I really am defective, then seeing the truth of that would be a relief, because it was torture to feel like I hated myself for no apparent reason, as you just described. So I was willing to discover either way, that I really was defective or that I wasn't. And that's the approach that I'm inviting you to have. It's like, so let's just look at that and see if we can find any evidence that you are not good enough. And I know you've probably done this a million times before, so stay with me, because this is not the last step either. Okay. All right. So really, let's give it a chance. Really look and give me your first best piece of evidence that there's something wrong with you.
The truth is, I really can't, because I don't, when I look at it from a logical place, I don't believe that. It's more around the story I'm telling myself, the fear of, if I record this song and I share it and people don't like it, I will feel terrible, and thus never share it at all. So I don't even know. I don't allow myself to find out most of the time if that's true.
I will tell you something that's really common that we do, and it is that we use that shitty feeling as the evidence that it's true. So if I feel this bad about me, there must be some reason for that feeling. And that is actually true. There is a reason for that feeling. And this is the part that's so simple that it stirs up a lot of resistance in people. It really is just the words you are saying about yourself that create the feeling. That feeling is not in any way a validation of those words. And we might get a little Deepak on everybody here by talking about, I haven't read anything of his in a while, but we were discussing before we started recording that you're reading one of his books. And so I love that you have that context, because words themselves, because of the definitions that we've learned that those words mean, they have a felt experience. Every word has a felt experience to you. The ones that feel awful are the ones that you're just accepting as true, probably because they feel the way they do. It feels like a validation. So when you have a happy thought, whatever your definition of happy is, but if you have a thought that makes you feel good, then there's no reason to question that, because who doesn't want that? But I think we're assuming the same thing, is that good feeling is saying the words are true. But really, the feeling is just the experience of the word that you learned as you learned to define it. So the same thing is always happening. Every experience you have, including the one you're having right now with your adorable cat, every single experience, you are interpreting it from your self-definition. So we're just going to stick with this one for today, that I'm not good enough situation. So as you're petting your cat, why is none of that stirred up?
That's a great question. River is his name. Mr. Ram. He doesn't judge me.
Yes.
I am good enough for him. I feed him. I shelter him. I cuddle with him. He gets everything he needs, and I get his affection in return. And it's just as simple as that.
And what would you say your emotional experience of him is?
Peace and love. Most of the time.
Right. And other fun things, as all pet owners will know. But yes, and so you see, that's a demonstration of the simplicity of what I'm saying. The words that you say to yourself about you in relation to your cat create an emotional experience. This happens to be mostly the kind of experience that you want to have. So now I want to go back to your songs. So I heard you say that if you make a song and you put it out there and people don't like it, you will feel terrible. And there is a reason why you would feel terrible, because this is part of the complex, we could say, it's not really, but it's masquerading as a complex concept of of not good enough. Part of what you learned with that was, how do you know? How do you know if you're good enough or you're not good enough? And you tell me, looking at your example, what did you learn should be your gauge for if you're good enough or not?
In that particular modality of my world, surrounded by so many professional musicians who have studied longer than me or studied more, academically than I have, and that I just assume are more rhythmically inclined or are just more gifted. And so it's like a comparison game of, well, this is what I admire, this is where my taste is, and this is where I think I stand amidst all of that.
I love that you see that it's a comparison game, because here's the fun part of that little scenario is that you are not comparing your actual abilities to other people's abilities. You're comparing your definition of you. So it's just what you're saying about you to what you observe and enjoy about other musicians. Do you see how that's not a fair comparison? You're not saying I have these abilities and they have these abilities. You're saying they have these abilities and that means I'm not good enough.
Mm.
Because that's how those invisible beliefs work. You are always looking for proof that they are true, which sounds perverse, but it really is so simple, that you are having the experience that you're looking for. And you think that's crazy, like who wants to look for feeling like crap about yourself all the time? But it's not that you are choosing that, it's that you're allowing it. You're allowing that definition that you learned from people who felt the same about themselves. And that's what you're using to assess yourself in comparison to others. And there's another piece of that puzzle too that's really interesting, because you and everybody else that I've ever talked to about this learned that other people's feedback is how you should gauge how you're doing. If you make a beautiful song that speaks exactly what you wanted to speak in that moment, but nobody likes it, then there comes that feeling of, well, I'm lacking in some way. I'm not good enough. If I were like this other person, it would have been better. None of what I'm saying, though, is written in stone. Like, there's nowhere is there any law that in order for you to be good enough, other people have to agree with you. This is probably the biggest thing that I work with folks on. Is like, if you wait for other people to agree with you about your worth and your ability, then that's what you will be experiencing for the rest of your professional life, at least, is that you're going to be experiencing that over and over again. And now take that one scenario and just see that that's true for absolutely every aspect of your life. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that it makes sense, because my other kind of main job or passion or hobby, if you will, is painting. And I always operate from a place of, I really need to go to art school. I don't know as much as my friends who have degrees in fine art. And until I go to art school, I will never really be that great of a painter. And I also can see that I make several $100s kind of as a side hustle by selling my art. So it's like, why can't I see that as good enough if it is literally making me money and I find pleasure in it, but it is still not good enough because I don't have a degree and I don't know as much as I could or as much as the next person.
Yeah, so here's the problem with that whole situation is that even when other people agree with you that it's good, that's not going to change the way you're defining you. And so every time you get positive feedback, which is what's supposed to tell you that you're doing well enough, it won't touch that when you learn to define Apple, when you learn to define yourself. Like, other people's feedback cannot change that for you. And have you noticed how many famous people with millions and millions of adoring fans and a gajillion dollars in the bank still have to try and accomplish something more? The next thing, do the next thing, get the next bit of approval. And that's because what you learned that will bring you peace, which is other people agreeing with your worth, doesn't, and it won't ever.
Right.
And so that's a really big paradigm shift, to start noticing. Like I'll just, give you scattered recommendations as we talk about what to practice in the coming days and weeks, and that's one of them. Is to notice that, to ask, where is there any evidence that another person's approval of me means I'm worthy?
And can I interject for 1 second?
Sure.
And how we reinforce our belief of not being good enough when we don't get it, or when we do get it, how we reject it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
And so, and I know you said that, and I'm just saying it to kind of reflect it, because I think I see it so often in just really in all situations, right? With professionally, personally, I just see this to be true, and how it shows up as evidence to support our beliefs in both directions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And the mystery can be solved if we can just get quiet for a moment or two and ask the question, why did I think other people's approval was going to change how I feel about me? Where is any evidence? And Rebecca, let's do this right now. Can you look around your experience and tell me what evidence you've ever had that other people approving of you makes you feel your worth?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in the social media age, and I mean, I understand that it's it's like a hollow form of approval. But yeah, I was kind of slave to that like button on Facebook for a long, long time. And I thought that meant I was interesting or I was doing something cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more than I got, I feel, as a child from, the people actually around me, my parents,
Mm-hmm.
my sister, my aunts and uncles, whomever. And so, yeah, I thought that I was getting that. And now I understand it's kind of baseless, and it doesn't matter because it ultimately doesn't make me feel any better or more worthy.
No, because it literally cannot change your self-definition. Only you can do that. And the way that you do that is, and we're just scratching the surface here today, but the way that you do that is to become intent on searching for the truth, not just what you think you know, because it's what you think you know that trips you up. If you feel like you know all these things about you and still you feel bad, then that's going to feel even worse. So the question has to start being, what makes me think this is true? Like, what makes me think that another person can somehow make me feel worthy? Because the spoiler alert for everybody that might be listening, that is never going to happen. It has never once happened in all the history of humanity, and it's never going to happen, because your experience of you is what you're saying. It's not what they're saying. In fact, their behavior, their emotions, their thoughts are all coming from their own self-definition, from what they think they are. So even when someone says, "Oh my God, Rebecca, you are so amazing," really what's happening is those words are coming out of how that person sees themselves. And if they're feeling unworthy, then what they're going to want is to make you feel good so you like them. Yeah, and this is not evil on anybody's part. This is just how invisible self-definitions work. But I'm illustrating why it's not my opinion, but the literal truth that no person can change the way you see you. It's just not possible. And anytime that you feel tempted to fall back into that, just look around the world. I mean, there's nothing that isn't an example of how that's not true. If we could do that for each other, Lisa and I'd be out of a job for sure. Everybody would be happy. But we can't, and it wreaks havoc in your personal relationships too, if you still are clinging to that notion that something that they can say or do or be relative to you is going to make you feel worthy, because it's never going to happen. As Lisa pointed out, like if our self-definition is one of any aspect of unworthiness, then that's all we're ever going to experience, no matter what anybody else's intention is anyway. But I think it's more helpful to see that whether their response to you is positive or negative, it's about them. It's about meeting their needs. It's about acting out their self-definition. So practice not needing praise, because it is a much bigger trap than being fearful of criticism.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So a few weeks ago, I watched, oh gosh, what is it called? That documentary on Netflix, the social media.
Oh yeah, Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma. And so I decided to remove social media from my phone for a while and pretty much stop posting altogether. I was allowing myself to check in on my computer just for business purposes, but I wasn't posting and I wasn't sharing what was going on in my life. And it allowed me to focus more on the things I was actually doing and how they made me feel, rather than I am doing this so that I can post it and see what people think. And that was very freeing. And it was great. It was a great couple of weeks. It was at the election that I started posting again and fell back into the trap.
You took the bait. Oh no.
I did. I was baited. I felt so alone in the world. I was like, what is everyone else experiencing?
Right. And so this practice, I think I mentioned to you, is like, it feels really radical in all kinds of ways. And the first way is what we've been exploring here for the last few minutes, which is other people cannot do anything about how you feel about you.
Right.
Like even in that, you said, I felt alone and I wondered what other people were going through. Like even that is not, it doesn't do anything to change how you feel about you. It might be momentary distraction, but it's not going to change how you feel about you. So that's a big piece of like, so, all right, then here's your next question for you to explore for the next however long you want to do it, which is if people are not how I gauge whether I'm good enough or not, then how do I gauge that? How do I know? I'm going to ask you that question right now. What's your immediate response to that? If it's not feedback from your circumstances, then what could possibly take the place of that to help you know?
Yeah, so I get that feeling most often when I am painting and when I'm creating something that without even needing an opinion, I'm just impressed with, or just find so much joy in, like finding that flow state, the environment, like I'll set an environment around myself that feels good. And I am just feeling bliss and looking at what I'm doing and thinking, wow, I really have come a long way. This is really beautiful. I'm so excited that I have the ability to do this. And that's it. And I do feel that in other things that I do as well, but it's definitely most apparent when I'm painting something that I'm like, shit, that was really great.
I love that you're having that experience. And I'm going to say that you really are doing the same thing except for yourself. And what I mean by that is you are producing something that you then have an opinion of, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you are still looking at yourself from that place of, is this, am I pleased with my performance? So now what you're doing is you are showing yourself the same conditional joy that you were putting on other people. So if other people momentarily make you feel joyful, that's a trap. We've already looked at that. It's not going to really change anything. But here's a really interesting part of this self-definition of not good enough, is that you actually are the one who is constantly surveying what you're doing and giving yourself a thumbs up or down. So yeah, big. That's really big to recognize, is that, so again, to practice in the future is for you to notice how you're doing that, because it can be super subtle. It can be really obvious, like in what you just described, or it can be super subtle, like almost to the point where you notice a kind of yuck feeling and you don't know where it's coming from. But if you pay attention to that yuck and get still for a second, you will be able to see that you're assessing yourself, because that's always the source of the yuck. Okay, so let me point out something amazing, by the way, is that inexplicable to the most brilliant minds among us is consciousness itself. So the fact that you somehow have an experience of you doing something and at the same time can be apart from it enough to assess it is the brilliance of consciousness. And so let that be super encouraging to you. As we were mentioning earlier, that's who you are. And that consciousness is free. It can in no way be limited by our assessment or the assessment of anyone else. And one of its qualities is the ability to know whether it is or not, whether you are being assessed or not, whether you have certain feelings. Like it is. And the inexplicable is, why does this particular group of particles in this universe have the ability to think about what it's like to be this group of particles? There is no answer to that question, which I'm so glad about. Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is like on the money for this book that I'm reading. He says consciousness is creativity or creation experiencing itself.
Yes, for the first time.
Yeah.
So there is no basis for assessment. Where would that come from? There is absolutely no way. I mean, in order to have an assessment, you have to have a comparison, as you just pointed out. So this is something I say often, but and you've heard it, I'm sure, but I'm going to say it to you again and give you a few breaths to see what would change if this is actually true about you. If what you're calling Rebecca, if Rebecca is a once ever expression of consciousness, if consciousness gets to be alive as Rebecca once ever, what is there to compare you to? How could you possibly say you're good enough or not good enough?
Oh, wow. I don't know. My heart rate like kind of elevated as I started thinking about that question. Because I don't know. I believe my spiritual beliefs kind of defy my ease of answering that question. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that this existence, this body, meat suit, if you will, does this eternally and in every possible variation.
It still would only be this experience one time. Just the word variations is, you're saying the same thing that I'm saying. True, every variation. Right. Because everything that consciousness can become, it becomes.
It almost doesn't seem worth, like, if it's only going to happen one time, there's no reason to compare it to anything.
Exactly.
I'm just like, I can't answer this question.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And so then you can stop.
I love that. Sometimes, so let me interject, Rebecca. There have been many times in my work with Kathy that I've paused and said, "Fuck off, Kathy."
Oh yeah, all the time.
Because it's such a mind twist, right? And so if you're experiencing any of that in this moment, I just want to acknowledge it.
No, this is like what I live for. This is like, my brain can't handle this.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
And this is really fun, but I hope you won't let it just be like a fun moment that we had. I hope that you're willing to right now, like, understand that the reason you can't really say anything about that is because you can't say anything about it from the concepts that you have learned in your life, because it is an experience that you haven't had of realizing that if consciousness, so let's look at some implications of this. If consciousness itself, I'm gonna get all weepy now for a second. Hold on a second. If consciousness itself is choosing to express itself as you, why would you not love that? Like, how could there be anything apart from that that would not want to be it? But if you're, this is on purpose. Like, consciousness is it's the source. It's not even the wisdom. It's the source of any words that we could say about it. Is the source. It's the source of all of that itself. And if it is choosing on purpose to be alive as you, how could you disagree with that?
I can't. It's incredible. It's like it's a special thing. It's amazing. And now as I think about it, I'm like, wow, I as some greater being is choosing to do with this being that was created. Like I chose to put tattoos on my arms, and I, being something above me, chose to do that with this. And it's exciting that we get to like play these roles of these separate branches of consciousness. You can't argue with it. How could you argue with it?
And so when a self-criticism comes up, a very fun question that you can ask is, okay, if I am consciousness itself being this in this moment, what changes?
Does anything?
It changes everything about the way you see you. Have a look into, just as a whole, have a look at your past from the possibility of you are intentional.
Here's a question that's bringing up
Mm-hmm.
that I don't know if I'll articulate very well, but is consciousness itself not what's creating these negative thoughts? Did I throw a wrench in it?
No, no, I'm so delighted that you see that already. So, and you heard what I said earlier about consciousness will express itself as all possibilities.
Right.
But is anything in danger if everything is itself?
How could it not be good enough?
Mm-hmm.
That was not the right way to say it, but how could it be anything other than good enough?
And so Rebecca's whole story, including having negative thoughts about herself, that's the whole experience that consciousness is choosing to have as you. Because here's a question to ponder, like, how would, if consciousness is expressing itself as everything, then where would anything else come from?
Mm-hmm.
And we still are often stuck in that very childlike mindset of there are good things and there are bad things. But when you say to yourself, if I am consciousness itself, it just moves you back from all that. You can still play the game of right and wrong, good, bad, yes, no, but it's a game because you are consciousness itself being all of those things, including thoughts. Here's this might be going a little fast for a first session. I don't think I usually mention this in a first session, but it's a really fun, you have a lot of background context, Rebecca. So have you ever gotten really still, listened to what you're calling your thoughts, and tried to feel like the source of that voice? Like, where is it? Where is it coming from?
I feel there have been some instances, very few, and not because I decided to sit down and like try to explore that or tap into it, just kind of happened. Probably I'm picturing one specific hiking trail I go to, and I'll go and I'll just sit, and suddenly it feels as if the thoughts that are coming to me are coming from like both outside of and within me all at the same time.
Because they are. Because if they're arising in consciousness like everything else, they're not confined to your story and just what you've learned to say about you. That's part of the whole beautiful, it's so the point of this moment is for you as consciousness to fully be Rebecca and all that she is. of course, including the thoughts that seem to belong to her. But really, there is no her and consciousness. There's one expression of consciousness called Rebecca. And so all of that, I love that you've had that experience. And if you practice that, you will notice that that voice becomes whole. It becomes, the thoughts will start to feel like coming from such a much bigger place. And it will be that consciousness that we were talking about tapping into. Really, you don't need to tap into it. You just need to notice what you're saying about yourself that's in the way. And you can't both focus and be completely convinced that you're not good enough and feel that that's just consciousness expressing itself, although it is. But the very second that you back up and remember that you are that expression of consciousness, it doesn't change your present moment. It just changes everything about the way you experience it. There is a holiness about being you that you can experience anywhere, all the time. Every time you recognize what you are, you can have the feeling of that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, because I know if I go into that setting, if I go and hike on that trail and I sit quietly, it will happen. It doesn't happen every time because I don't necessarily go there with the intention of seeking that experience. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess I can understand how, if you can just allow yourself to have that experience without that setting, it can be with you all of the time.
Of course. How could consciousness be confined to a setting?
Right. Yeah, but then I'm just thinking, I'm like, well, how do I get that when I'm on the highway and my New Jersey kicks in and I just want to yell at every single other driver on the road?
I'll tell you how, and it will make you laugh out loud every time. Every time you tell somebody to fuck off, remember that that's consciousness saying that, and it will make you laugh every time. You can't hold on to anger when you realize that it's just consciousness playing the game of being.
Yeah, or, well, it's funny. I've kind of had this, way of coping with road rage of, well, sometimes I screw up on the road too. And maybe this person is just having a bad day. But also it's kind of this idea of, I just cut myself off on the road. If you look at it from a consciousness level.
True. Yes, it's true.
Damn it, I did this to myself and now I'm getting angry and I've done that to myself too.
And when we are unaware that we are consciousness and that everything is, that's when we're behaving out of those self-definitions that we learned as a human being, we think. And so one of those two things is happening around you all the time, whether you're in Jersey or Maui. Doesn't matter, because the people, and this is really helpful in freeing yourself from other people's behavior, all other people, whether they're intimate or strangers, is that if they are not aware in that moment of being consciousness, they're feeling all the feelings that you have had the experience of, and their behavior is coming out of that. And to take that personally is silly. It's a child's game. It's not, because it has nothing to do with you. It's 100% about who they think they are and the fear that stirs up.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And it's interesting. And what's coming up for me right now is I've had these, I kind of call them, these epiphanies, revelations, where I kind of, everything just makes sense. I understand the interconnectedness of everything, and that we are all one consciousness, and that the way someone else is feeling is the way I'm feeling, and it's this shared experience. A moment I would call brief moments of enlightenment, if you will. And I want to be able to have that feeling all of the time so that I can just be in this constant state of understanding and remembering and just let shit go.
Yes.
You know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I got excited about you seeing that because I had a brilliant client ask me like, why is it better that, because I'm teaching her to seek to understand, not to assess. And she's asked me one day, she's like, why is it better to understand than to assess? And I said, well, it's not better or worse. It merely produces the feeling that you want to have when you understand. And when you assess, it just perpetuates the feeling you don't want to have. It's as simple as that. So understanding, I have found that to be a word that encompasses really everything that we're reaching for. Because when you truly understand with clarity, then, yeah, as you say, everything makes sense. And there are no suffering emotions possible. It's not possible. It's misunderstanding every time that creates unpleasant emotions and suffering. So if you can, and just one little thing I wanted to offer you about what you said, understanding is something that happens right now, just in the moment. And you don't have to plan to have that in the future. Is the very second that you worry that you're not going to be able to see this way at some point in the future, you have just stopped seeing this way.
Right, yeah.
And is there any more of consciousness in an imagined future than there is in this moment?
Can you say that one?
Yeah, like, is it possible for consciousness to be more in a future moment than it is right now?
No, I guess not. It would be the same once
Yeah.
I get there.
And so there's no point in worrying about how I'm going to experience it in the future.
Right.
It's just seeing it right now. Like understanding what you are right now will set in motion this perpetual game of clarity and understanding and delight. And it won't occur to you to please people.
Right.
That's
yeah. It feels like I'm like, well, do I have to live second to second to never lose that?
That's all you're doing anyway.
Yeah, I guess so.
Isn't that funny? I love that we think that we're living like this whole timeline of past, present, and future. But and my joke about that is, and I'll give you the same offer, Rebecca. When you find yourself living the future, please text me because I want to know how you did that.
I'll let you know.
Please do. So far, I've not gotten a single text. It's very disappointing. But you see what my silly joke means is that every time you ask yourself, where am I right now? The only answer is going to be now. Now, does that mean that you don't speculate about a future, that you don't make a grocery list? Like,
Right.
No, it doesn't mean that, because everything that you're doing, including thinking about a future, is still happening right now. It's just right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to plan to live minute by minute, because you can't live any other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
So you're not even giving anything up. I love it about this thing that I don't even know what I don't do anything. This thing I talk about, there's no sacrifice. You don't have to give up anything. You just try on. Is it possible that consciousness is expressing itself as me and my story? You will so fall in love with your whole story as you continue to contemplate that. You'll see the brilliance of it. You'll see where love always was. You'll see your worthiness throughout, because there's no real indication that you weren't this worthy all along. How could consciousness lack worthiness?
Mm-hmm.
Becomes a silly question.
Yeah, it makes the idea of being able to embody that always, and not, being slave to, I have a pimple on my chin today and it means I suck and it means I'm unattractive and everything's miserable. It becomes so trivial when I imagine living a life where all I can feel is this feeling of understanding.
Absolutely. And if you find yourself worried, oh my God, I have a pimple on my face. Now understand in that moment that that's consciousness speaking, because that's all there is. And then
Mhm.
it's laughable. It's like, what?
Is this what you're worried about right now? Consciousness?
Right. It just gets instantly funny. Like you said, it just becomes like not, and not funny in a, oh, it's worthless kind of way, but funny as in, oh, that was my spiritual childhood kind of way. You know, it's like, oh, that was when I believed in Santa. That was fun and silly. You know? And you,
Santa's not real?
every time I say that, somebody says that back to me. It's like, what? You just ruined everything for me.
This came up with Lisa at one point, and I'm Jewish, so Santa was never real.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I still know people who are teaching their children to believe that. It's really frightening. I'm like, they're going to feel so duped, you know, when they figure it out. I'm like, oh my goodness. But it's one of the games we play to try to add some excitement about being alive. When we don't know that we're consciousness, because there is nothing more exciting than you being a once ever, like consciousness getting to live as you in this particular setting once ever. It's like, there's nothing more exciting than that. So you don't have to add anything to it, like self-deception. So I know that it's getting time for us to wrap up. So I hope that, I know this was a lot in a little bit of time, but I hope that you feel like you have something new to practice, and not as a way of managing your life, but as a way of just returning yourself to understanding in the moment when you feel like you don't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, are there tools to help myself remember throughout the day? Like my inclination is like, put a sticky note on the fridge that says you are consciousness and you do understand. Like, what can I do for myself so that I don't forget, or that I can remember more?
Yeah, so the things that I've been saying, it's really all about noticing. I mean, do sticky notes if that's fun for you, but there's really not, it's just a matter of you paying attention to what you're saying. It's really just that. And understanding that as consciousness, if you seem to go a day or two and have forgotten it, can consciousness really forget itself? You know, nothing has really gone wrong. And every time you recognize that that voice that you hear in your head, every time it says I something, can only mean consciousness, because it is consciousness being you. Now, you know, typically I see people once a week for, and that's kind of their touchstone for reminders. And also what we do is once we get this basic foundation laid, we apply it to everything that feels challenging or unpleasant that comes up. And sometimes at first, you will feel like, I couldn't even remember, like I just was feeling all this distress and I couldn't even remember to do that. But I did this, I found this, or it found me by myself. I didn't have any teacher and I didn't have anyone to ask about it. So I wanted it. I wanted to be clear. I wanted to understand, and I wanted to know what was more true than I had been living. And somehow that got me here. So I'm saying that to you to encourage you that even if you never had another conversation about this, still you are it. You know, it will return to you over and over and over because it's what you want.
Right.
In the meantime, I mean, you're reading a book that is the perfect reminder of what you are.
Yeah, you know, that's true. Since I started this book, it has not left my mind that I am consciousness and the constant expression of it.
Yeah, that's it. So when you feel pretty solid in it, once you feel pretty solid in this perspective, you can start looking at the things in your past that you thought created the way you experience life. and just get a deeper understanding of those things too. Because this applies to everything, all the things. There is nothing outside of it because there's nothing outside of consciousness. Right? It was such a pleasure, Rebecca, hanging out with you and chatting about these beautiful things that I get so excited about. Thank you so much again for being willing to do this.
Likewise, thank you so much. It's so helpful to have these ideas present and discussed.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate it.
Brilliant. So Lisa, is it time?
It is. And I just want to say like how amazing it has been to just sit with you all in this experience. And I just like, I've got all the flutters of, excitement and just, yeah, I just feel so honored to be able to witness this. And Rebecca, thank you so much for being a part of this today. It has really been a privilege. So as we often end our podcast, just always remembering all joy all the time, because why settle for anything less?
Exactly. And